Okay, so if you just joined, we're going to be running questions. You can see on screen the link you have to use on Google Meets, right-hand bottom corner of your screen. You can add questions throughout the presentation and vote on existing questions. I'm going to be answering those in the end of this session, and we're going to get started. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I believe most people in this call are actually coming from startups or the startup communities. I think this presentation will resonate a lot with you guys. So, if you've been in a startup or you're currently in a startup, usually most startups go through the same three stages. And the first one is when you get started, it's just a handful of people. You become amazed at how fast you can build products. And usually, whenever I meet founders, one of the it's funny because one of the attributes that they use to describe their company is we're really fast at shipping features. And a lot of people feel like this is us because when we compare to our competitors, they're really slow, we're really fast, right? And what happens next is once you start growing your teams, especially if you raise around and you hire quickly, you actually become a lot slower. And at this stage, usually CEOs, but also CTOs become very, very preoccupied because they got to a point where they invested a lot of money. They were supposed to output a lot more in terms of product development or feature development, but they actually find out that they're slower. And, throughout time, they try to fight this usually for a year or two. Eventually they give up. And I've been in a number of conversations where how it starts to go like you have a conversation with a customer, the customer is asking for a feature, and your normal response is, that's a good idea. We'll add it to next year's roadmap. So you kind of move away from that speed you had as a startup into a stage where you become a lot slower. And the reason why I'm excited with AI is that I believe that we can change that with the use of AI. The reason behind the slowdown in startups is fairly well known is complexity. In complexity, there's a number of laws around complexity. You got some of those laws pointed out here, but in the end of the day, it's people times process. So that's usually what creates that complexity. As you add people, you have to add process, and process is just basically a way for people to get along in their workspace, their work activities every day, right? But that breeds a lot of complexity. You usually add processes and then you add processes to counteract the fact that you added initial processes to begin with. And so complexity sinks in, and at a point, you were going very, very fast. And then as you start to add a lot of people, then, you go from shipping features really fast into just making promises to customers and not being able to deliver. Most startups actually run the same playbook, right? We come from in software development, we come from a background where 20 years back, whenever you ship software, usually was burned on a CD and you were mailing or you were delivering that to customers directly. So whatever version you actually built, that was the final version. There was no upgrades, nothing like that. And with the advent of software as a service and with cloud infrastructure, we started to ship software eventually every year and then every month. And now I believe that most teams that are working really well by current standards are shipping software every day, right? But in the end of the day, everyone is using kind of the same flow, which is back from the original design of software, which is the waterfall sprint. Initially, when the agile and the Scrum age began, people were looking at waterfall methodologies as something that was really old school and shouldn't be followed anymore. But the fact is that if you look at the current setup of a Scrum team, or if you look at the sprint of an agile team, what you're going to find is the same methodology, but just compressed in less time. So you still have requirements, product management, design, architecture, engineering, and QA. And those are still handover tasks that they're just being executed in 15-day sprints or 3-week sprints, whatever that is. You might be shipping software every day, but the fact is that you're still handing over all of these tasks, right? And that's where a lot of the delays come in, and a lot of the processes need to be built because each department, usually you have different departments for design or for architecture, for QA. they're actually running their own sprints and become misaligned over time. If on top of that, you add marketing and support as bottlenecks, because a lot of the times the feedback I get from a lot of founders is that they're being stuck and not being able to ship features because marketing is in the loop and now wants to create a campaign, or support is in the loop and wants to receive information firsthand so that they can support customers. All of this adds delay and in a way that we ship software. So the idea today is that with the advent of AI and being able to leverage AI to do a lot of these functions, I'm going to try and demonstrate today how you can overcome these challenges by getting AI in the loop in your software development lifecycle. So, hi everyone. My name is Jean Comanats. I've been starting companies for 20 years now. I'm an investor. I love everything about startups. I'm usually a technical founder, but I've been a CEO before as well. And I had the pleasure of investing in a lot of Portuguese startups, and especially and most lately around the AI space. I'm currently working on two products. One is Upgrade My Repo. I can show it really quick. So Upgrade My Repo is basically just a tool for you to get your current product tuned with AI. So it's a tool that can get your source code and build AI agents, commands, tools, whatever you need to actually start working with AI. And the second product I'm working on is invertly with customer success, agentic customer success for startups. So I'm working on these two products by myself. So solo founder, just using a bunch of AI agents to help me build these products. And a lot of the experience I have hands-on with building AI that you're going to see today actually come from my experience building these products. Okay. So let's get into it. So, I think we're going to go from being builders of systems, which if you're a leader at a startup, that's a lot of your time is you're spending building systems of people, systems of processes, but you're actually just focused on building systems. And we're going to be focusing on systems of building moving forward. Okay. So, and that's transformation means that whatever the process of building new stuff is, you're going to have less control, but it's going to move a lot faster. Okay, so one way to think about this is that we're going to go into an age where you can define not only the roles, you could do that before, but you can also define the perfect execution of those roles. And that's what we're going to see today. Okay, so working with AI, you have three main pillars. Okay, so as a crash course to AI, you'll have your rules, and rules are basically guidelines and constraints for your AI behavior. This is, I would say, the bottom layer of your setup with AI. And then you have commands. Commands are prompts. You can think about it that way. They are prompts that are going to be predetermined and you're going to use them frequently, but you want the outcome of those prompts to be always pretty much predictable. And you have agents. Agents different from commands in the fact that agents, you don't know the outcome of their work. You just assign them a goal and you want them to achieve a goal, but you cannot predetermine the outcome of their goal. So we're going to go into examples. So for rules, I think a lot of people already set up their base rules with AI, whether that's Claude Code or Cursor or wherever. I'm mostly using Claude Code. We're going to go into tools in a little bit, but with Claude Code, you can define one or many files of rules, and rules will basically tell the AI what your product is, what your stack is, what are the most frequent commands, what the AI should look for or not look for, avoid, whatever. Those are base rules that you want to make sure that whatever you're doing with AI, those rules exist or context exists and that it's always followed. So for me, for example, with this project in Vertly, which is a big code base, I start off my rules file with core technologies, with the structure of my repository, with essential commands, and just a number of examples that I want the AI to be aware of, regardless of what we're doing. Okay. My rules file is not very big because one, we have to make sure that we keep the context window as clear of garbage as possible, but also because in the commands and in the agents, I have a lot more specification. Okay. And I'm going to show that to you in just a bit. Okay, so these are rules, very, very basic, and then we can move on to commands. So commands, like I said before, are prompts that you're going to use to actually do the same task over and over again. Okay, so this is, you can call it a command, or you can just keep, these as prompts in a text file and just use that as well. It's kind of the same thing, but the example here that I have, which is API test, this command in particular, what it does is it uses AI to try to get my test coverage up to 90%. Okay, so I have a number of API endpoints in my platform, and I want to keep the entire API always with at least 90% coverage. Okay, so what I do is I run this command, and this command is going to execute and try to get that coverage up to 90%. And how does it happen? Basically, what I have in the specification of this command is the structure of the test files that I want. So this is just an example of a test file, for example, and the test categories to include. So there's a number of categories that I want to test for example, successful operations, authentication, error handling, edge cases, whatever that is. And I have a structure of the tests as a template, and then I have an analysis process. So you can look here, you can see here that we're always going to start with initial coverage check. So the outcome of this command is actually going to be a coverage report. And based on that report, the AI is going to identify API endpoints that are not up to the 90%, and it's going to start producing tests in an iteration process. So you can see here that step 2 is identifying missing coverage. Step 3 is generating additional tests. Step 4 is basically consider iterating until we get to 90%. Okay, so the idea here is that I run this every time I end the development, or once a week, or once every night. It really doesn't matter. I can run this on demand, and it gets my test coverage up to 90%. So I'm going to show you an example of that here. Okay, so for those of you who haven't worked with AI yet, this is a command line. I'm running Claude codes, and the way you run a command is just a slash commands. You can see here that the first command available is actually API test. So if I run this test, what's going to happen is what I described to you guys is going to start to occur. Okay, so we'll start there and leave it running. We'll come back here in a minute. So you can see that the AI is basically going to follow the pattern that we've defined before. It's already checking for the coverage, and then it's going to start listing the files, the API endpoints, and then start creating a plan. We'll come back and review the plan for this. So these are commands. This one is for API testing, but I have others, for example, for security. I usually run the security commands every week. What happens with this command is that I'm going to have a very in-depth security review, and then it's going to create a file. And that file is going to be all of the findings, security findings that the AI got, so that then I can review and then feed it back to the LLM to start fixing those security concerns, right? So that's another one. One that we're going to talk about it and use in these examples as well is the start task, which is going to, basically kick off a development task for us. But I'm going to come back to this one in just a bit. So these are commands. Now, the last one, and probably the most important one moving forward, is agents. Okay, so agents are different from rules and commands. And the main difference is that agents run on their own threads. So you can think about it as if you're running Claude Code or whatever Gemini, whatever LLM you're running, if you're talking to it directly, what happens is you're talking to the main thread. So you're talking to the parent level of the LLM. When you run an agent, what happens is that the main thread then kicks off a second thread or a subthread, and the system prompt, which is the base definition of how the LLM is going to behave, is the system prompt that you're providing as an agent. Okay, so that's how you get to roles, because you can kick off 10 different subthreads, all of them with different roles based on their initial definition. Okay, so let's look at one example. I have a bunch of agents here, but one example, one of that I've been working on for quite some time, is the Scrum Master. So the Scrum Master, the goal of the Scrum Master, kind of like, in human teams, is to orchestrate the development workflow. Okay, so I'm using Linear as a project management tool. A lot of people use Jira. I used Jira in the past as well. I'm using Linear now. And the goal for the Scrum Master is actually to get a task from Linear and then delegate that task to other agents to develop the codes and then make sure that all of my requirements are met. So you can see here that the workflow overview for the Scrum Master says, we're going to fetch a project, analyze dependencies, order tasks by priority, and then for each task, we're going to create a Git branch. We're going to select the best agent, delegate implementation. We're going to do code review, security review, test coverage, commit the changes, and then create a pull request. And then if there's more tasks, we're going to continue to do this. Okay, so the idea here is that if you get a project, a software development goal, right, you're going to break it down into tasks, and then the Scrum Master is going to work through those tasks with the other agents over time. Okay. And the way he is able to achieve this is one of the ways is use MCP functions, which is basically just a way to get information or to write information into the linear. For those of you not familiar with MCP, you can think about it as an API. That's the way that LLMs can interact with other systems. Usually they're called tools, but that's one way that LLMs have to interact with other systems is using MCP servers. And through that, they can act on other services on your behalf. Okay, so I've integrated the linear MCP server, and that means that my Scrum Master can now list issues or get a specific task or update their state or create comments, whatever that is, right? So it's gonna get the tasks, and then it's gonna define using the priority that was defined. He's gonna start getting the tasks, and then I have an agent selection matrix. You can see here that based on the task type, the Scrum Master is going to use different types of agents. Okay, so for example, if it's going to be a front-end UI task, it's going to call the JavaScript Pro as a primary agent. And then as secondary agents, probably going to call code review and security auditor. This is a matrix for the Scrum Master to make a decision on which agents to delegate on based on the agents that I've defined on my system. Okay. And then we have a loop. Once again, like I described before, this is just a text description of the same loop. We have an agent delegation format. So that means that when the Scrum Master sends a message to an agent, this is the format it's going to use to send that message. We have a review process and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is the full definition of my Scrum Master, which is an important agent for my specific workflow. Now we have other agents here as well. For example, our code reviewer. The code reviewer is an agent that does not do code as well. So both the Scrum Master and the code reviewer, they do not write code. The code reviewer actually, of course, looks at code, right? And the whole point of code review is like between humans is to make sure that there's alignment between your rules, what you would like to see in your code, and the code that was produced by the LLM, okay? And so whenever I run a task through a number of agents, in the end, there's an output. It can be a pull request, for example, and the code reviewer will run every time. And once again, it's going to create a file, and that file is going to contain all of the findings of the code review. And then I can review it myself and feed it back to the LLM to work on any of those findings if necessary. So there's a lot of tools out there now that you can buy to do code review. But the fact is that if you're using Claude Code, you can just have your own agent. You don't have to pay anything extra for that, okay? So those two don't produce code. I'm going to show you one that does, for example, the front-end developer. And with a front-end developer, now I'm going to get a bit more specific on how I want my code to be done. So you can see I got a bunch of zero tolerance rules. So for example, no magic values, no code duplication, no files over 200 lines. So there's a number of different things that over time I've been adding to make sure that the code comes out exactly how I want. And there's also description about components or technologies that I'm using, patterns of code, whatever that is. So whatever you need to do to set the tone with the agents is going to come in at the agent definition, but you're not really trying to control the output. You're just trying to give it boundaries so that it plays within the space you've defined for the agent. Okay. If we go back to our terminal, remember the tests, right? So I run the API test commands. Actually, We have currently 48% of coverage. We need to reach 90%. So there's 44 endpoints that are identified that do not have sufficient coverage. And there's actually a couple of them that have 0% coverage. The LLM basically is telling me, hey, priority number one, let's get these 0% coverage endpoints up to par. Right? And then, it basically defined all of the strategy to get everything up to 90%. Okay. So now there's basically three things I can do at this point. I can say yes and auto accept the edits. And that means that whatever the output the AI is going to produce, I'm going to be okay with it. I'm not even going to review it. I can use, for example, the code reviewer agent later down the road to review that. But for the most part, I don't care about the exact code that is produced. Or I can do yes and manually approve the edits. And what that means is that every time the AI decides to produce codes, it's going to prompt me back and say, hey, this is what I think I'm going to do. Do you approve it? Okay. Or I can say no and keep planning. And that means I'm going to provide feedback saying, hey, let's not do it like this. Let's do it this other way. So I'm providing feedback so that the plan gets updated, right? So this is actually API coverage. I have a very high degree of confidence on the outputs. So I'm just going to let it run for a while and start to produce tests. You can see that like there's a number of files here that were specified to be produced by priority. So Cloud Code is now going to start to produce that coverage. Okay, so this is really helpful for everyone that wants to have a high level of coverage in their codes, test coverage. And you can just run this on the background and it keeps running until it hits the desired percentage of coverage. Okay. So just recapping, I know a lot of information I just dumped on you guys, but just recapping, you have rules, commands, and agents. Rules are your base set that they're always present. Commands is something that you want to execute a lot of times and you want to have control over the outcome that you're going to get. So it's a very specific target, always repeatable. And agents are broad definitions of roles, of specializations that you want to give tasks to so that they can start working. Okay. And by working with this, with a combination of commands and agents, I got to a point where I actually feel 10 times more productive or even more because there's two things that are basically contributing to productivity. One is I don't have to talk to a lot of people. It's just me doing code. So if I'm a developer, even at a big company, but now I have a bunch of agents working for me. For example, I have a database guy, or I have a designer or a code reviewer. Those are less meetings that I have to have with those people that I used to engage with before. But there's also another productivity gain, which is the speed at the code that is produced is a lot faster. So what I found is that the AI can output easily 20 times more code per hour than I can writing code manually. Even if I know exactly what I have to do and how I want the code to be written, I'm still a lot slower than the AI just producing code. So those two things together, they really create a big impact, okay? And so what I'm going to try and demo right now is my end-to-end workflow of developing a new task, okay? And then I'm going to go into some detail of the steps, but for now I'm just going to demo it so that you guys can see it. Okay. So I always start with a research phase, and usually a research phase for me is just a conversation with ChatGPT. Okay. So for this project and in particular in Vertly, I have a bunch of different conversations inside a folder, which is going to help ChatGPT become very focused on what he knows about the project that you're developing. And usually what I do, because I like to develop new features and start with a visual approach. Usually what I do is I ask ChatGPT to generate a prompt so that then I can go into Lovable. I'm going to tell you about Lovable in just a bit, but my goal is to go into Lovable and produce a mock-up of that feature. Okay. So for this product in Vertly, the last thing that I was working on is a dashboard for product analytics. Okay. And so I just wrote ChatGPT because he already has a lot of context. So I just wrote, let's build a prompt with extremely detailed specification of a new screen for our platform that will display product analytics collected through the usage of our customers with the Invertly SDK. Okay, so this is an awful prompt. Okay, so this is really, really broad. But the fact is that we have a lot of context, so the output is actually pretty good. Okay, so there's the output is a prompt because that's the way I asked it. Okay, and what I did was I just copy paste this into Lovable. Okay, now Lovable, for those of you who haven't used Lovable before, is a platform where I think this is the best definition of vibe coding is basically you can talk through the platform and it's going to create software for you. Okay. And I use it mostly for mockups. I haven't used it to do anything that is production grade, let's say, and mostly because it doesn't have the backend capabilities yet. I think they're launching it soon, but the front end is amazing. There's other platforms out there. I'm going to go through the available options in a couple of slides, but I mostly use a level for front end. And I also use it to do a lot of presentations. So the presentation you're seeing today, and I think all of the presentations I've done in the last 3 months, they've all been done in Lovable and not PowerPoint. Okay. So anyway, I've been using it for the last 6 or 7 months. And one of the things I've done with it was a mock-up of my platform in Berkeley. And so you can see here, this is a fully working mock-up. I can navigate. There's a bunch of features that actually work here. It just doesn't have a backend. It's a front end with mock data, but it helps me to visualize exactly what I want. And it's a lot faster to iterate to get to a point where I say, okay, this is exactly the feature I wanted. And then I can work against that target as I work with Cloud Code. Okay. So what I did was basically I pasted here. You can see this is the prompt that came out of ChatGPT. It's a massive prompt. So I just pasted it here. And then I went back and forth, just iterating like 3 or 4 times, nothing special. And this was actually the output. Okay. So this screen, product analytics, was the output of just, doing a prompt in ChatGPT, pasting it here with all of the context that these tools have. This is the output. Okay. And now, usually what I do is I start here. I really fine tune all of the widgets and everything I want to see on screen before I move to the actual development workflow. But the first step in the development workflow for me is taking a screenshot out of this and handing it over to my agent, which is a product manager. And I'm going to demo that right now because I think it's really cool. I'm going to kill this guy. This agent is actually working on the API coverage. I'm going to kill it because I need the full context available. And I'm going to show you that right now. So the screen you're seeing now is actually VS Code, for example. I'm running Cloud Code inside. This is actually Cursor, but it's the same thing as VS Code. But I'm running Cloud Code inside of Cursor, which is going to make it easier for us to see the changes that the AI is going to do over time. Okay. So what you have here is, like I was saying, usually what I do is I just screenshot this. Usually it takes a number of screenshots, okay, but I'll just do one for now. And I'm going to go to Cursor and I'm going to call my product manager, which is an agent. And I'm going to paste these screenshots, okay. And the product manager is actually going to start creating the stories for me to develop this feature. And I'm going to show you the product manager specification in a bit. But the way it's set up is the product manager knows it's going to get a screenshot. It knows everything about my platform. And so it's going to break down everything he sees on screen into different stories so that we can get to the point that the actual platform is matching the screenshot. Okay. And the product manager is also using an MCP server with Linear, and it's already creating the stories in Linear. Yeah. So this story with all of the issues are created by, I think this is actually from last week. He is still creating or trying to create these stories. But anyway, for time's sake, let's just use this one as an example. So what happens is that the product manager gets these screenshots. He's going to break it down into stories, create a project in Linear. Based on that, it's going to start creating the issues, and all of the issues individually are going to come up to the point where they're specifying the full story. And what's really cool about this is that the way that the product manager is creating the stories is actually the specification of the product to be delivered. Okay. And so you can see here that we have a user story, we have acceptance criteria, we have user journey, we have business rules, and all of that. Success indicators and all of that. Design considerations as well. So these are fully fledged stories so that the other agents can start implementing. Okay. So it's asking me here, do I want to proceed? I'm going to say yes and auto accept the edit. So now it's actually going to start creating the stories in linear. So it's going to duplicate this same information, but that's okay. So once we have these stories created, the project and the stories created, we can see here it's going to, let's just wait a bit because I think it's going to start creating new ones. So you guys can see that in real time. So by the way, with AI, there's a lot of waiting. So 20 seconds of waiting, 50 seconds of waiting, 1 minute, whatever. But once it starts going, you move very, very fast. Okay. So the first one is what's the name? AI powered analytics, a command center for tracking. Oh, that's the summary feature product analytics dashboard. Okay. Okay. So what happened? I should have deleted this one previously because what happened was that the agents found out that there was already a project for this and now it's updating the existing project. So that's good, but it wasn't the intention. But anyway, so we have the project, we have the stories. The next step here is I'm going to stop this agents right now. So the next step is we're actually going to start developing the codes. Okay. So what I've built was a command. We can see it here, which is the start task commands. And the start task command basically defines how we're going through all of these steps. Okay, so this is just an easy way for me to start a new task. And what happens is I just do /start task and give it a task ID coming out of linear. And it's going to spin up the whole development workflow. Okay, so it's going to read the tasks, it's going to call the project manager agents, it's going to create the branches, it's going to select the agents, and so on and so forth. So what I've explained to you guys before. So if we look at a task here, in linear, we can see one of the issues here is, for example, the ID is invertly 158. So we can just do start task and then invertly 158. And what's going to happen is that command is going to run. And once again, the fact that it's a command, it means that we're always going to do things the same way. And it's going to get that issue. So it just got it here. Okay. And then it's already telling me starting the development of the task. And the task itself is, as a product manager, I'm going to see key product health metrics at a glance. So it's a specific part of that screen. And now it's the AI, it's calling another agent, which is the project manager. And the project manager is actually going to orchestrate this development, and it's going to keep a local memory. It's already running here. You can see project manager running. It's going to create a local memory so that, if this is a project that we're developing over a week or two, we need to make sure that everything we do is actually being kept, the state is being kept. And usually I do two things. One is linear. So in linear, we have the tasks, we have the ones completed, the ones not completed, their priority and all of that. But there's also a local file that I'm keeping, just created one. You can see here, invertly 158. You can see here that this is going to act as our local memory for the development of this project. Okay. And so there's a number of new subtasks, let's call it like that, which are just small incremental steps that are going to be assigned to different agents. And by the way, these can run in parallel a lot of the times, which is what is happening right now. So the project manager actually called the Codebase Explorer to check exactly where we should do the codes. Okay. But there's a number of other small tasks that are going to be delegated, and the project manager is actually going to keep all of that memory and make sure that we're making progress against our plan. Okay. So the way I actually have controls, because this is, a lot of the times this is the actual question people have is, okay, how do you keep control? So there's two phases where when working with an agentic workflow, you have a lot of control. The first phase, and the most important by far, is the spec. I think we're going to next year or throughout the next months, you're going to be hearing a lot about specs. And specs is basically short for specification. And today we use product requirement docs or technical requirement docs, whatever that is. But what happens is, someone writes a product requirement doc and eventually we get to code. And a lot of the times the product requirement doc is forgotten and the code is actually the assets that people rally around. The code and the code running in production or in development is what people look at and make decisions, right? Now, with AI, it's really hard to keep up with all of the code being produced. Okay. So one of the things that happens immediately when you start working with agentic technology is that you cannot review code anymore. It's just too much. You won't have enough people to keep up with the code being produced. So you actually start reviewing specs and make sure that everything that is relevant is in the spec, and everything that is you don't want to happen is also in the spec. So you also have to specify what you want to happen and what not to happen every time, right? So that the AI can work and always compare the current status to the future status, which is the spec. Okay. Yeah. And I think we're going to come into a day where if you have a spec for a software, for a platform, and if you run it in multiple AIs to develop that product, you end up with the same end product. That's the goal, but the code is going to be different. Okay. So the asset that is valuable is actually the product running in the spec. And, the code itself is not that valuable. Okay. So it's going to be a lot more discardable moving forward because just the fact that the cost of that code is going to come down a lot. So that's the way, one of the ways you keep control is through the spec. And there's going to be a lot of talking about specs moving forward. Now, another way to keep control is through these local memory iterations, which you might or might not use, but I would definitely recommend, based on what you're trying to achieve. There's also this file that you can review and you can fine tune to make sure that whatever you want to do is actually implemented the way you want to. So we can take this one as an example. For example, add interactive and drill down features, which is the title. The description is implement click handlers, tooltips, quick actions menu, and keyboard navigation. It's going to be delegated to the JavaScript Pro. It's pending right now. So if you want to have a lot of control, you would come here and add to the description saying, we should use this library or that one or whatever. So that's another way you can have fine-tuned control. Okay. So this is, the fastest way to work with AI, for better or worse, is the agentic way. So you can see here, right-hand side, the agents are running and they're already producing codes. The backend architect is actually already producing a SQL migration. So it's changing the database at this point. And a lot of people would shiver at that. To me, this is just normal. There's a way you have to set up your environment so that these things can happen and they don't have impact. Okay. So one of the ways I've begun to think about the production of code is that I might come in a specific day. I have a task to be developed, and I can actually run 4, 5, 6 different iterations of that task in parallel, and then just select the best outcome. So select the best way, or the one that has the best look and feel, or whatever that is. So you're going to throw away a lot of codes a lot of the times, but you're also moving a lot faster as well. Okay. So, you can see that at this point, the demo I just gave you is you have Lovable doing design. You have the agent for product management, actually breaking down into projects and tasks. And then you have a Scrum Master or a project manager, whatever your flavor is, running with all of the agents implementing the codes. Everything that are processes or communication and all of that just becomes implicit in this workflow. Okay, so the process itself, end to end, and I'm going to walk through it, is first of all, like I said, research the idea. Usually ChatGPT, you can use others, but usually ChatGPT. You build a prompt, you generate mocks. You can use other tools for mock generation as well, but I really like Lovable. I'm giving the screenshots to a product manager. I can give the screenshots and a lot more context as well. For example, a text file with context if I want to, but usually the screenshots just do the trick. And then this is where I spend a lot of time, just iterate on the stories and the tasks in linear, and then start the task or start a sprint, whatever that is. Agents get to work. I review by testing. So that means that once the project manager says, hey, this task is done, what I do is I run the platform and I test it and we can iterate. I provide feedback back to the AI so that we can iterate on the functionality. And then I always run a deep review, and that's code review and security review. Those always run on each pull request. Whatever comes out of that, I also review personally. You can have false positives. You can have stuff that you don't want to worry about. So always review those as well and provide feedback for fixing stuff. I deploy to a staging environment so that the platform gets built. Everything gets updated with AI as well. So documents, tests, linear stories, everything. And then eventually it merges and it goes into production. So these 13 steps, the way I'm running them right now, all of them touch AI. I just came in, on a couple of them just to make sure that the outcome that the AI is producing is what I want. So how do you make it possible on your code base today? So the first concept I'm going to share with you guys is 100% automation rule. Okay, so a lot of companies out there started by giving tools to their existing departments and existing roles so that they can, we call these co-pilots basically, that they can augment the function. And the fact is that if you're looking at AI just as a 20 to 30% augmentation of an existing function, you're not really getting the result you should out of this investment. My rule is really simple: is you look at a process and you want to automate 100% of it. Okay, you might not get to 100%, but today with the technology available, you're going to get to 95% at least. You need to create healthy foundations. Rules, commands, and agents, they need to be repository specific. For some companies, that might mean, we went through that phase where everything was a microservice and there's companies out there running 50, 60 different repositories. That's going to be hell for AI. Okay. So you need to make sure that you have healthy foundations. And that means, a solid code base where all of the context is being shared and you're adding rules, commands, and agents and iterating on those over time. So if these rules, commands, and agents are not specific to your code base, they're not going to work. And you're going to be running with AI, but you're going to be upset that the outcome is most of the time not what you want. Okay. You need to adopt this mindset of build and discard. Let the AI build 5 copies in an afternoon and just keep the one you like. The team meetings now should be about discussing the assets that was produced by the AI and not just, discussing how someone is going to produce assets. So at this stage, there's not a lot of tools out there. The universe of relevant tools is still very small. And I think most people should try and strive to master all of the relevant tools. All of them pretty much work the same way. So a lot of concepts are shared. But the fact is that the specific way they're being implemented or the models that they're leveraging or the fine tuning of those models makes a big difference. So, 5 months ago, I was running everything in Cursor and then Claude Code came out and I had to change to Claude Code because it was so much better, right? And today I'm just running Claude Code and Gemini for LLMs. But the fact is that, master the tools, but be ready to drop them as well. And the last concept here is burn the boats. With these types of transformations, there's only path forward. There shouldn't be a path to go back to the previous generation of doing software. This is a painful transformation. So removing the possibility of going back is actually a good tactic. So tools for research, I've used ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. They all work. I prefer ChatGPT. It's still, from my perspective, the better tool for reasoning, for research, and all of that. Claude is definitely the best for code, but ChatGPT for research is probably the best one. For UI, UX, you have a bunch of them out there. Lovable and Replit were the ones that I used the most, but I really like Lovable. I think the speed at which it works and the fidelity of the outcome for design is really, really good. So I would recommend actually, try them all out. They all have a free tier, but my recommendation is Lovable. For code right now, Claude and Gemini, those are the undefeated. ChatGPT is coming out with Codex. There's a lot of reports on Codex being able to now do stuff that is exciting. I haven't tested it recently. I think the last time I tested was like 2 months ago. So I don't know, 2 months is a long time right now. But Claude Code is my main development tool. And then Gemini, because of the massive context window, it has 1 million tokens of context window. Whenever I want to do large code sweeps, I'll probably resort to Gemini to do that. For workflows, a tool that is out there that is called N8N is really, really exciting. It has native integration with a bunch of different AI tools, and it allows you to orchestrate pretty much everything. But you can do the same thing with MCP servers, with Cloud Code as well. The whole point is agents get a lot better. Not just agents, just using your LLM normally gets a lot better once you allow them to reach out into the ecosystem of your tools. It might be databases, it might be a GitHub, it might be your linear, whatever that is. Just allow these tools to access information. They become a lot better. And for platform, one of the things that I really noticed is that a lot of platforms like Versal, for example, or AWS, GitHub, they're in a massive race to adopt everything that is AI related. And so I feel like every platform out there is doing that effort of trying to be relevant in the AI age. So whatever you're using today is probably going to be fine. I'm deploying in Versal and Supabase. Supabase as a backend a database. I use it for functions as well and for storage. And Versal to run the platform, sometimes backend and front end, but most of the time just front end. Okay. So how do you, as a CEO, as a CTO, how do you actually transform your company? I think the first step is really clear. This is a top-down shift. This is a cultural shift that's going to happen at a startup or a software development company. And, it needs to start at the top. That's the way I see it. I think if you have a bottom-up approach with resistance at top, it's not going to happen. And I think a lot of these, roles, executive roles, CEO, CTO, you need to get your hands dirty. You need to actually, if you're an executive like I was for the past 5 years where I wasn't touching any codes, you need to make time to go back to code and understand how these tools work because it's a matter of belief. If you don't believe, you're not going to, be able to lead your team into adopting AI. Now, once you get to that step, you can start an agentic team tomorrow. I would always recommend for you to identify what I call a product builder. Usually it's, a full stack software developer that has the ability to talk to customers, the ability to talk to product managers, understands the business. So usually there's always one of those in your teams, like someone that can take a feature end to end and talk about that feature. And, if you pick a product builder, you give them the tools with Cloud Code, with, there's a bunch of tools out there. You're going to, and you give them the goal, which is 100% AI generated assets. You're going to see magic happen. Most of the reports I have from people taking this step is, I can do in a day what I used to do in 2 weeks. That's the norm is usually 1 day, 2 weeks becomes 1 day once you start running this type of workflow. And then with the learnings, I think this is the most important step is with the learnings, you'll have to rethink your processes. A lot of the things that you're doing today, you won't be doing them 2 or 3 years from now. Or if you're still doing them, then you're probably going to be a lot slower than your competitors. And right now, most people won't fit the profile. That's just a fact. The technology is at a point where, it's not easy for everyone to use the technology. I think it's going to get better over time. But right now, most people won't fit the profile, and a lot of people will have to work to build those skills up. Now, another fact is that if you want to output the same amount, let's say if you have a roadmap for a year, you'll need a lot less people for the same roadmap. Now, that can mean a great opportunity to cost savings, right? Or it can be a great opportunity for you to actually expand your roadmap or your product portfolio and just go faster, right? So either way, it's going to be a time of hard decisions. So the last one I really want to focus here is if you've started a company like 2 years ago, even a year ago, what I'm finding in conversations with people that started a company before AI come into play is that even if those companies are small, 10 people, whatever that is, they're still having a lot of struggles with changing. Okay. And the reason for that is because they're already set in their ways. They're already doing code, producing products in a specific way. Now, all of the startups I'm seeing today, being born today, and that means like the last 3 months, they're all starting to do code with agents. And so that means that if you're starting a company today, you have a massive edge because you're going to spend a lot less money. You're going to be a lot faster. But most important, the culture you're going to create is going to be significantly different than the previous generation of companies. And so, startups being born today have a massive edge. Okay, so the most voted question was, how do you allow agents to communicate or trigger each other? It comes out of the box with Claude. Yeah, so it's all about that trick of saying, there's other agents, and if you want to, you can delegate to those agents. So it's based on that specification. Claude Code understands that it can trigger other agents. So what you guys saw, I think they're still probably working. Yeah. What you guys saw with the project manager was actually the project manager was triggering other agents. I don't want, for example, the front end agent talking to the back end agent directly, because that's going to create a lot of communication paths. Okay. So I want everyone talking to the project manager. The project manager then makes decisions and then delegates the work. So that's the way I like to work, but you can have them talk to each other. Okay. Is this GitHub repository available for the attendees? That's actually my private code. So no, you're probably referring to the agents and all of that. I'm going to share some templates moving forward, but you can also check out the project that I've done, the product that I've done, upgradeMyRepo.com. The idea for that product is actually to get you to that point where I'm already today, but for your repository. Because if I share my files with you, they're not going to be helpful. They're going to be helpful from a template point of view, but there's a lot of text in there that are specific to my code. All of that is not going to be helpful for you. But I will share templates in the future around agents and commands and all of that. Is the recording going to be made available to everyone after the call? Not immediately. I'm going to edit this, but eventually I'll share the link with people. Looking at your solution, it feels that you're a one-person team. So how would this work in 5 people? Okay. How does the project manager keep sync between the different team members and all of that, right? So I'm taking this question as, if you already have a 5-people team, how does this transform, right? The fact is that you're going into a point where you're going to a reality where these tasks that used to be done by people, for example, code review or a design or whatever, they're all going to be done by AI. Okay, so that's the first realization. So that means that the act of executing, the operational act of executing is going to go away, right? Now, the expertise still remains. So let's say if you're using AI to produce a design, right? I suck at design, so that's why I use Lovable, right? Not a designer. But the fact is that you probably still want a designer validating the output of the AI, right? But the designer, maybe he spent like 8 hours producing and 1 hour validating. We're talking about it. Now he's only validating. So there's 8 hours of work available, right? I'm just giving an example. It might not fit, but the fact is that you're going to have your people with a lot more time to handle, they're going to handle a lot more tasks. So one of those is going to be true, right? It is what it is. So you'll probably need to rework your teams today, right? As you're adopting. How complex it is to integrate with an MCP server? Not at all. It's just an install command. What you have to know about MCP servers is there's a lot of MCP servers out there that are, let's call them third-party MCP servers. For example, I just installed MCP server for Salesforce for a project I'm working on, and there's like 10 different MCP servers out there for Salesforce. And there's one official Salesforce integration. But if you install one of the other 9, you might be sending your code or whatever, your IP, to someone that you don't know, right? Just with MCP, like that's the only thing you have to be aware of, is that you're going to be exposing whatever you send the server, you're going to be exposing it to a middleman. And if that middleman is not someone you trust, then that might be a problem for you. Other than that, it's really easy. It's just a configuration file or an install command, and you're done. Okay. So I have a brand new idea, no repo, no agents. Where do I start? So I would always start with, that's what I do. I always start with something like Lovable or V0 or Replit, whatever, right? And I try to build a working product, add working products with these platforms immediately. They're going to produce code that is okay code. It's not amazing, but it's good, right? And then usually these platforms commit to GitHub, and then you can just download the code from GitHub You can clone your repository and start working there, right? So what you're going to do is you're already going to start with the base that was created with AI, and it has a couple of frameworks that it's using, or programming languages, whatever. But you're going to start from there and then move up. I wouldn't recommend you start from scratch. Like, I have no code, and I'm going to start asking the LLM to produce, I don't know, the API and the database and all of that. I wouldn't do that. You can just move a lot faster if you use something like Lovable or Replit. Okay, next one. Do you break work into classic stages and tasks because you want artifacts, compatibility, or prevent hallucinations? I don't care about compatibility with human workflow right now because I'm working alone. But like I said before, the spec is going to be the most important thing moving forward. Okay, so going through those stages where I have a design and then I have a story and then a task and all of that is what allows me to have control over the AI, right? And like I said before, once I have a task, I can just run 5, 6 different iterations in parallel and just select the one I like the most at the end. There's a lot more questions. I'm not going to go through all of these, but what I can do is actually I can download these and then compile a document, share with all of you guys with the answers. So that might be helpful. So I'll follow up on these. So if anyone wants to ask something else or share feedback, opinion, whatever that is, this is a short session, 1 hour. And so we're just trying to run through all of this. Bernardo, go ahead.
Thank you. So allow me just make one kind of the skeptical side of things. I've been using AI, as I guess almost everyone. I share the vision about the future, but I'm super skeptical about the code quality right now. And that's, I guess, my main concern. And my question is, are we assuming that moving forward, the code base will be like a sort of spaghetti code base that we are
No.
never looking at it, or
No. My personal experience is that AI writes code a lot better than I do. That's my personal experience today. It wasn't when I started 8 months ago. Okay. So, and there's only 3 things that got me to this point. The first one was actually write a lot better specs. So the initial specification of what you want needs to be really, really good. Second is make sure that your code base is friendly for AI. Okay. And that means that if you have an API, it's folder and routes and all of that, and just make sure that the code base is really, you can navigate the code base easily. You don't have files with 10,000 rows and lines and all of that, right? Because if you think about it, the AI is going to search through all of your code base and try to read files and snippets of code and all of that. Just make your code base really good for AI. And for old code bases, that's hard work, but it needs to be done, period, right? And the third one is the setup, the rules, the commands, and the agents. They need to be specific for you. If they're not specific for you, it's not going to work. Once I got to this point, the code produced 10 times out of 10, it's better than my code. And the number of times I've seen the AI, code for edge cases, for performance, for security, whatever, things I wouldn't do, because I'm lazy, like most developers. I would just do the happy path. And then if a bug shows up in production, then I would deal with that bug later. And I see AI do a lot of edge cases, security type things, because that's what I wrote in the spec. I want those things to exist, and the AI is happy to do that. So my personal experience right now is the code is better. You just have to do, your homework to make sure that you get there. So next in line, Isabel.
Hi, good afternoon, João. Thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful. Great for people who aren't used to program, I would say, to code. But thinking about more senior people that are very thorough on their code and like to do it very, very well and make sure there is no refactoring in the future. I do think they are using AI still at the moment as an helper. It's like Santa's little helper. I would say that the rules file that you stated is just the first prompt to give the entire set of things that is the context that it needs. Only the minimum, of course, because these are AIs that don't belong to us and we know that. So this is code from other, and it's in the cloud. So we have to be careful with that as well. And in that case, I would say still very senior engineers can produce better code. AI can be very helpful in being faster, but it's great for them that they have this helper, but it's not replacing them. So they don't feel that the code ended up being better than their code. Because if the products didn't have a time to go to market, they would go back and refactor for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, that's the conversation happening right now. There's a lot of moving parts in that conversation. Like I said, your code base, even the programming language, because if you're using a very old programming language, the LLM is not going to be good at it. The rules, the commands, like all of that. And then there's just the fact of there's platforms or products out there that are complex products that interact within an ecosystem, right? And the AI has access to the code base, and then it can also have access, for example, to the database. But if there's other moving parts in your system, it might not be aware of them, right? So the context, the knowing of how your product operates is also very important. And usually that's what a senior developer also brings to the table is they know how the product works, right? So I don't think like we should look at this as a direct replacement. I think everyone that is thinking about AI as replacing people are kind of missing
Is
the point here.
I think
Yeah,
so.
I don't think replacing people is the goal. The goal is just that, there's a lot of things you do in a development workflow that suck and slow you down and can be delegated to AI. And if you at least do that, I'm not, for me, it's like, because I'm working alone, so I'm happy that the AI does all the code. That's good, right? But if I work in a team and I say, look, I want for these specific components, I want the code to be produced by our team and not by AI. You can delegate stuff on the fringes and start there, right? The models are going to improve from my perspective, but most important, the way that the models are being used is going to improve because right now it's not plug and play, right? This is a technology that is open context, right? And so you can use it for a lot of things, and it's going to get more specialized into the future and get to a point where uh, it's going to produce better and better outcomes in a much more predictable fashion. But I don't think the goal is to replace people unless that's the goal of the company. If the CEO or the CTO wants to replace people, then you can also replace people, right? It is what it is. Thank you.
Yeah.
Luis, go ahead.
Well,
Sorry.
one advantage is the fact that you mentioned the rules. So if we have many standards in companies, it's very hard to make, well, you can do static analysis as in the old days, but I think this set of rules that you set at the beginning of everything of the project is better for process compliance and making sure that you are following the quality rules for your product than not having this at all, and having this as a basic, even if your senior people are still working a little bit hand in hand with the AI, it will be a lot of work that you will spare because it's already there.
Yeah. I think this
Thank you very
is
much.
the fact is that you can focus people on what they really enjoy doing. And that's the big realization I had is like, I move so fast and I like building features and products, right? It's like, I also like doing code, but it's like, it gets to a point where if you're doing code all day long, it just sucks. So, I like to move through features really quickly because that's exciting. And so it's just bringing out what I like to do best, right? But I'm not going to delegate the process of imagining the product. I could do that, but I don't want to do that because that's what really, to me, that's what's valuable for me, right? And so I think it just amplifies what you're good at. Louis, go ahead.
Hello, thank you for this. This is not a tough question, but I'm here because my CTO was here last week and he left the meeting amazed and he talked to me about this for 1 hour. I was trying to convince me, but I'm more skeptical. And then he's been building the agents this week. He started with like a head of people, like someone that writes out guidelines. That text output was good. The problem is now we have a product that we've built for a year and we are improving and building features on top of it. We've been trying Lovable to design UI, and it's really hard to make him build on top of what we have. Because I see that the project that you show, Lovable is already like, it looks like you built everything there, and you're just like, that's why Lovable has the context properly. But when we share screenshots of what we have, it's hard to build on, like for it to understand the context. So the question goes to, do you have any experience from someone doing this on a project that existed already, or only doing it from scratch where all the AI, like everything is built by AI and has the context from the AI? Because I think that may be the hard, like
Yeah.
giving the context about what everything that is created already.
Yeah. So I've applied the same principles to at least 5 different existing projects, old projects. Some of them with more than 10 years. 2 of them that had more than 10 years. And you can get to the same place, but you have to make sure that the code base is aligned to so that you can deploy AI there, right? So in the example you gave me is, okay, we have a platform, we want to use a Lovable to produce mockups, right? So there's a number of tricks. One is just, screenshot your application, paste it there. It's going to produce something that is similar, right? It's going to be good enough. But if you have a designer on your team, he's going to look at that and say, no, this is all wrong, right? Because the quality level he's expecting is a lot higher, right? So one of the tricks you can do is actually you can create a project in Lovable, and then you can commit to the same GitHub repository. You can commit your CSS rules and your CSS definition, basically. And you can also commit a file that is a file of think about it as a design system with rules, right? So Lovable is going to use that moving forward because you committed to the same GitHub. But the point is, you shouldn't be trying to get Lovable to produce an exact, design for your platform, because what's going to happen is you're going to transform that design into a spec, and that spec is going to be executed by AI within your code base, right? So when the AI is actually working within your code base, it's following your patterns, right? Your CSS rules, your HTML, whatever libraries you're using, and all of that. So the output is going to be something that is part of your project, right? So you shouldn't be trying to match Lovable in your project one-to-one. Actually, the UI that you've seen in my screen share is similar to my product, but it's not the same at all. But I just screenshot, send it. I don't share the screenshots with the agents, by the way, just with the product manager. The agents are going to follow my design system in my project. So the end result is going to be different, right? But it's just a way for me to build visually, because I build a lot faster if I'm looking at the final result and iterating on the final result.
Okay, I think that makes sense. And it's a really good advice, the one for committing the CSS rules. And maybe I think the problem here is that we're trying to get UX, not UI. We have this complex product to put here, be creative. And I think that was maybe the hard part, that we could get it first with ChatGPT ideas in general, then try to see how they look once you know the ideas. Like build the UX first and then move the UI to Lovable.
Yes, I think that's starting with a spec is the most important thing, because that's going to be your source of truth. And then you're going to use that across AI systems to make sure you have the output that you want.
Thank you.
Danielle, go ahead.
All right. Great presentation. Really powerful.
Thank you.
I've experimented quite a bit with AI. My team uses AI, and I think this is a good follow-on from the previous question. But I have 2 SaaS products. They're both old. One's 10 years old, one's 5 years old. So they're pretty mature. And to your point, where in the future or in now and moving forward, the spec of the product is actually where the value is. How do we go to an old code base and generate a proper spec that we can then move forward into the future with?
That's like what you're asking is, okay, so how do I capture the existing platform so that then I can add on, let's say, new features, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I've seen it being done in a couple of different ways, but it's always the same kind of flavor, which is you use an agent, a code-based explorer agent with an LLM like Gemini that has a massive context window, but you have to combine the codes with whatever information you have about your product. So think about it like, for example, user manuals or, customer-facing information, whatever that is. Okay. So you'll have to do a kind of a one-shot thing, which is let's provide contextual information about the codes, with the product information. You have to marry them both so that you can create this baseline of information for the LLMs moving forward. Now, once you get to that point where you feel like, there's a direct correlation in the information layer. There's a direct correlation between my code base and the features, the value that I'm creating, right? I believe that then you can start doing new specs and it will just use the existing definition as context for the new features that you want to develop. Because even with a new project like Invertly, for example, I've used so many different LLMs at this point that it's not about the LLMs at all. It's about the information you keep and how you keep it, right? And so that's why agent definition, rules, commands, specs, and all of that are so important, because you're always swapping LLMs in and out. So there's no permanent memory. You only have context window, and that's it, right? And so, that's what I would start, is Codebase Explorer, and tie it with documentation. You'll probably need to run like 3 or 4 different iterations, because you probably want different, think about it as a hierarchy, where you want to have a feature explanation that is short, but provides enough information to the LLM that doesn't pollute the context window a lot, right? But it provides sufficient information. And then you probably want to have files that are very descriptive. Once the LLM says, okay, I got to start working on this feature, so I need to know a lot more about this feature. So you have a different file, which is a descriptive it's gonna mix codes with business value. So you probably have like, okay, these 3 files, these are these API endpoints. This is how customers use those API endpoints, and this is the business value they create, and all of that, right? So you get to that level of detail, but you have to keep those separate so that whenever the LLM needs to know, it can know what it does or what it is, and then it can ask for more information if it actually needs for more information. And there's no deterministic way, which is a problem. But the fact is that you'll have to iterate. And this is my personal experience: is I've iterated on these files for months until the point where it's like 98% of the times I just accept the outcome, because that's exactly what I wanted, right? But it started probably at like 60%. And I got very frustrated. And then I understood it's not about better prompting in the activity itself. So if I'm developing something, it's not about me telling something specific, and it's all about the spec and the base files, the context that the LLM has. So instead of iterating on prompts, I started iterating on the rules, on the commands, and on the agents, and pretty much it's always auto accepts everything that is being outputted.
Awesome. Great answer. So my team, they're using Claude, they're using Cursor, mostly kind of like Copilot, right?
Yeah.
And then I've built a couple little things with Replit just to experiment with its capabilities, and it was pretty good. But like for what you've showed us today, what's the learning path to get like from where someone like me is now as kind of a technical founder to where you're at?
Well, I think it's mostly a mindset thing. I'm going to be honest. That was the hardest part for me. I had a very big advantage because I came out of an executive role. So I spent the last 5 years in meetings and not doing code. So when I stepped out of that role, my goal was I need to deep dive into AI. That's going to be the next big thing. I didn't have the fluency of writing code anymore. So I wasn't being tempted to always go back to writing code. But the fact was that I think like a month in or 2 months in, I got really good at writing code again. And I felt myself like, okay, I need to, the LLM is not producing what I want. So I'm just going to write it myself, right? And it got to a point where it's like, I reminded myself, okay, the reason why I stepped away from executive to being, focused on this was so that I can master AI coding. And if I'm writing code, I'm not going to master AI code, right? And so it was just a mindset thing, sticking with it, just reading through the blogs, just viewing a lot of YouTube videos. There's a lot of great content out there from developers to developers about tricks and tips and all of that. And I don't think there was a specific thing. It was a lot of conversations, a lot of learning and experimenting. But most of all, this mindset of I'm going to have 100% of my code being generated with AI, and the output is going to be a lot better than whatever I could produce. And so that was my mind. It's still my mindset today. There's still a lot of improvement to come, but I think that's the most important part. If you can't get past that barrier of I'm going to do it myself, then you're never going to get started. Once you put away the keyboard, let's say, and you start, dealing with the fact that it's probably not producing what you wanted, but you're trying to fix that instead of doing code, then it's really fast. I think you can get to my level in like a month or two. There's nothing magical about what I'm doing. Like if you start consuming information, you're going to get there very, very fast.
Okay, appreciate it.
No worries. Nelson, go ahead.
So thank you for the presentation. It was great. And actually, it's a good follow-up question because my problem or the problem that I'm having is trust in the output of the LLMs. My background is in cybersecurity, and I've tried to build some stuff using AI, multiple tools. And my problem is always the confidence. Like I don't have any confidence to ship to production the results because it's so much code, it's so much stuff that I cannot track it. And you mentioned that you use as well agents for code review and cybersecurity, and that it's a circular question. So how can I trust the agents and the agent that does code review to review what I build and have confidence in shipping to production?
Yeah, it's a really good question because if you get to the core of it, and I've worked with many, many teams and hundreds of people in software engineering. And the fact is that if you look at the way that we are producing code today, ignore AI, just the way we're producing code today, if you run a large team, you can't go back to trust, right? If you're a CTO at 100 people team, you're not reviewing the code of everyone, right? You're probably not even reviewing code, period, right? And the people actually reviewing the code, a lot of the times they're junior developers, and they couldn't care less about a problem being put in production sometimes. And so the fact is that you trust people. That's what you trust, the processes you might have in place. Like you might have tests, or you can do security, for example. You might run penetration tests, or you can have security audits, or whatever that is. But in the end of the day, you're trusting people, right? And so that's your line of defense, is you trust people, right? And the reason why you trust people is because we have this belief that people will act in good faith. And if something happens, there's going to be accountability and responsibility, right? And it's hard to create that sense with AI, right? Because you don't know if AI is acting in good faith, right? It's like AI doesn't have that concept. And if it puts a bug in production, a security issue, there's no accountability and there's no responsibility, right? But the fact is that the probability is probably the same of people or AI committing an error is probably the same. The upside that I found with AI is that you can have a lot more checks and balances that run in the loop. For example, those security review agents that do a much better job at keeping stuff safe because they always run, right? If you think about it, like someone at your company today does a pull request and there's code review. If it's a normal size pull request, people are going to skip over it, complain about a couple of things, but they're mostly going to be concerned about coding style. Sometimes there might be a concern about performance or security, but that's an exception. That's not the rule. With running an LLM, you can run performance, you can run security, you can run whatever you want and define. You can run all of those checks, and the output of those checks is going to be very, very good if you have things properly set up. My security review command, for example, I run it every week. Although, I'm not in production, I just want to make sure I'm not accumulating tech debts, basically. But I run it every week, and the output is insane. Like, it's a lot better than all of the tools I've used before for security checks in my code base. And I was running at my previous company, we were running 3 SaaS products, 70 million in recurring revenue, 400 people in the company. We had multiple security certifications like PCI, SOC 2, HIPAA. There was a number of them. I was always, every month there was audits or tests or whatever that is. Customers used to do pen tests at us every month as well. And the output I got from a lot of the services I was working with, for example, Tenable, Rapid, household names, and the outputs I was getting were a lot less informative than what I'm getting from AI today. So I'm speaking out of experience. Now, what happens frequently is that you have an AI agent that is producing code, but is not concerned about security, okay? Because that's just the nature of this game is you have limited context. So if you want an agent to produce great You can't say you're going to produce great UI and it needs to be, you also need to produce great backend and great SQL schemas and, keep in mind security and all. Like that doesn't work. You're going to exhaust the context window and it's not going to work. So you need someone to produce great UI. Okay, focus that. And then you need an agent to just be focused on security and then double check their code. And this is how you get to a point where it actually works. With a vertical specialization in very narrow focus, right? So you shouldn't launch a security review for your entire code base. It doesn't make any sense, right? You should produce codes like a day's worth of code and then run a security review on that specific code. And with these workflows and the fact that you're just running agents, it's not people attached to this, you can get to that point really quick and you're going to be a lot safer than you were before. That's my experience.
And just a quick follow-up, do you define any KPIs, any metrics that you use to evaluate the results of the LLMs? Or how do you, at the end of the day, how do you evaluate the results?
Yeah, my goal is always like, how good does the LLM match the spec? And if the answer is not good at all, what I do is I go back to rules, to commands, and to agents definition, okay? Or to code base. Like it happened to me in the past, for example, where the LLM wasn't able to hit the spec and I had to rearrange my code base in that specific area so that, split files into smaller files or rearrange the folder so that they make a lot more sense and all of that. Especially in older code base, you're going to have that. But my specs always have, for example, test coverage percentage, load time in milliseconds, targets, load testing, number of sessions per second or requests per second, whatever that is, specific security concerns for my projects in particular. Like if I'm doing something that is customer facing, I might be worried about cross-site scripting or a SQL injection or impersonation, like whatever that is, right? So you can define all of these KPIs and then you can run the checks to see if the code produced is just basically complying with those.
So usually you go for the specification.
Yeah, that's all in the spec. Sometimes I even use stuff like number of clicks. Like if you're building a feature, I want the user to be able to reach the outcome with just 3 clicks or 2 clicks or whatever, and just force the AI to think through these things, right? So that all goes into the spec. The way I work is, in the end of the day, you're the decision maker and the approver, and you're in the loop. You might be frequently in the loop or less frequently in the loop, depending on the feature, right? Or the stage of the project. What I found was, this product I built, Upgrade My Repo, I've built it in less than a week, I would say, or probably a week. It's funny because it was the last thing I've built end to end. And I started with just, going really, really fast with vibe coding. I wasn't double checking anything, right? Because I just want to get to a point where, okay, I have something working now. And then it got to a point where it's working. Okay, now I want to be specific. And so I was a lot more in the loop. It slowed down, but it slowed down because now I'm thinking production. Now I want to make sure that, we're not hitting the API frequently or the database. I want to have caching, security concerns, whatever, right? So at that point, now I'm in the loop and now I start to control what the AI is doing at a more fine-grained level, but that doesn't mean I'm doing the code. But when, for example, in existing platforms, when I know the platform, a lot of the times I'm reviewing the code in the loop, okay? So I let the AI do its thing, but I don't auto approve. I look at the code and say, okay, or provide feedback. Okay, let's do it like this or like that. But in the end of the day, like this mindset of always allowing the AI to produce the code is going to put you in a position where you have to improve the AI instead of, just trying to work around the current state of the AI.
Yeah, that will do. Thank you.
Of course. Miguel, go ahead.
Hello. Hi, João.
Hey.
João, one question. I'm sorry I arrived late to the webinar,
No worries.
but I arrived in the moment that you were talking about the project manager, and then I saw that you say that for instance you don't upload the image layouts to the agent itself, but you upload it to the project manager. Can you please resume in 30 seconds what you mean by by this concept of project manager, and how do you use it?
Yeah, so there's a number of different agents that I run, right? And the only one that I actually provide screenshots to is the product manager. Okay. And the product manager, the role of the product manager is basically to get a screenshot and create the stories and the tasks for other agents to implement. So the product manager doesn't do any code. It just looks at the screenshot and starts to describe the functionality I need based out of the screenshot. This is one approach. You can have multiple approaches here. You can provide a basic description of what you want, and the product manager will augment that description, whatever you like to do, right? But the way I work is always screenshots. The product manager breaks it down into tasks. And then the other agents, like the front end or the back end agents, they work on those tasks, but they don't have access to the original screenshot. They just have access to the specification.
It says that, imagine if you are using Cloud or if you are using Replit, do you create a separate agent for that to become the project manager?
Yes. So I have a spec. Yeah, I have a agent spec for project manager, and the project manager, the goal of the project manager is to orchestrate the work. So delegate the work to other agents. Okay, that's one. And the other one is to keep the project updated. So the project manager is communicating with the other agents and checking what was done, what wasn't done, and updating the status of the project.
Okay.
So those are all different agents. Those are all
Okay.
different agents. Yeah.
One last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
For instance, you are using Cloud at this moment, but probably you already use Replit. I'm making some tests in Replit, and not in Replit, also in Cloud before, and Lovable, etc. And one of the things that I noticed is that after a certain period of code, it tends to make several errors, even simple tasks that you imagine at this moment. I am asking to Replit to make a correction in a simple error as a form that has a field, and in the edition of this form, he is not populate the correct field on the database. And I'm with this. I don't know, maybe with 40 prompts that I already sent to Replit, and he is not able to make this simple operation.
Yeah.
What do you think about this, and why is it happening?
That's expected. I'm going to the problem with platforms like Lovable and Replit and others like it is that you cannot control the context window. So you have a chat interface, you're chatting with the LLM, but you don't have a way to actually control the context window by clearing out existing context or defining what goes in there or doesn't, right? So that's very common with platforms like Replit and Lovable, where they go into exhaustion, but you're just talking with them back and forth. The context window becomes very, very crowded because it's a sliding window in these cases, right? You don't have a way to reset it. So it gets to a point where it doesn't work. So that's why I always move to Claude Code. I usually start with Lovable just for a mock-up, and then I move to Claude Code because with Gemini CLI or Claude CLI, like if you're running the LLM in your computer, what happens is the way you should be working is you give it a task, it executes on that task, and then you immediately reset the context. You just basically do clear, and Claude is /clear, and it's going to kill all of the context, because the only context that you should need is the rules that you defined, or the commands and the agent. That's the only context that you need. If you build let's say you have a task, you execute a task, and then you move on to the next task, and you haven't cleared the context, the previous task is going to be polluting the context.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah.
Right. And if you keep on doing this, it's going to get to a point where it's not going to work because it has too much pollution. So what I do is every task, it's a reset. The fact that I'm using agents also helps, because what happens with agents is that the agents are a subthread. They run, they do whatever they have to do. They do not pollute the main context. Okay. So that's why, having this orchestration like a project manager is good.
Yeah. Now I see.
Right. So they run on the background, they execute what they have to execute, and then they die, right? So the only thing that the main context knows is that that specific task was completed. That's it. We don't need to know anything more, right? And so the management of the context, there's a new term coming in, which is context engineering, which is going to replace prompt engineering. You're going to be hearing about context engineering moving forward. Basically, that's the premise: is you have to be very, very careful of the context management. What's in there and what's not in there is very, very important, right? And those platforms like Lovable, Replit, Easier, and all of that, they're not, they're not at a point where they're implementing good context management. I think they're going to get there, but right now they go into saturation.
But you have any suggestion for Replit and Claude Online, etc., to clean the context or something like that, so we can? Is there
I don't
any?
know. Maybe there's a way, but I haven't because I always, I develop locally with Claude. To me, it hasn't been a problem. So I don't. Maybe there is, but I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Manuel, go ahead.
Hi there, João. Well, in my company, we're starting a lot of things from scratch now, and this is great information for us to start building also some SaaS or our platforms. However, our product includes also a DAC, so we have hardware and we work and we make code for it, and we are also trying to build some of those things also from scratch. And my question is if you ever worked or you have any colleagues that actually use some of these tools for more kind of, it doesn't have to be like super low code C like, but if you are talking about working with like Yocto that creates like custom Linux distributions that we can even work with Python with those things. But if you have any experience with that.
Personally, I don't, but what's going to help you is whatever you're going to be using, try to get an MCP server that is connected to the documentation of that framework or language, right? So that's going to be the most helpful thing. And I'm going to give you a similar example, which is whenever I'm integrating with a third-party API, I integrated recently with a CRM management tool called API Deck. So API Deck is just a middleware for you to communicate with different CRMs, right? So you implement that once and you communicate with a bunch of different CRMs. And what I did was actually I've added the MCP server for the documentation to Claude. And so whenever Claude doesn't know API Deck's API spec, okay? Because it's a recent project, it's not public, whatever. So the fact that I've integrated the MCP server and then I put on the rules file that whenever you need to do something related to API Deck, you should use the MCP server to make sure that you read the documentation and follow their spec, right? So I can see the LLM when it's working on that type of integration, it's always trying to understand what is the correct way of implementing stuff and using the specification. So that's a good trick for you to bring in less known stuff or even private stuff. If these guys don't have an MCP server, another trick is there's a couple of tools out there that they can get, you can point them at a page, for example, like an API specification page or documentation page about syntax, whatever that is. And it basically scrapes everything and creates a markdown file for LLMs to ingest. And you can add that to your rules. So you can create a folder just basically saying, these are the rules for technology A. And then on the main rules of your LLM, you're going to say, whenever you're dealing with technology A, there's actually a specification file here that you can use, or there's an MCP file server that you can use, right? So it's always going to use that context. Now, the problem with that approach, that's a solution, but it brings a problem, which is there's going to be a lot of pollution to the context window. So you're going to need to manage context a lot, a lot better. Let's put it like that, right? So what you're going to see is that because it needs to read a lot of documentation and search through that documentation, you're going to exhaust the context window faster. But that just means that you need to break down your tasks a bit more and make sure you reset every time you implement something and so on and so forth.
All right, thank you.
No worries. I think we're through the questions or through the hands up. Okay, most people left anyway. So thank you so much, everyone still on the call. Thank you for joining today. I hope you had fun. I'm going to be sharing content around this, probably templates and the recording and all of that. But I got all of you guys' emails, so I'll probably just put everyone on a mailing list and share over email. Okay. So thank you so much for showing up today. See you soon.
Bye.